Welcome to the Casey Catch Up. We got Josh Koo and we're talking downwind month, July. It's coming. And a few of us have been training for races like Molokai to Oahu, Maui to Molokai, Hood River. And there's a race up in Cairns, northern Queensland, called the Great Barrier Reef Ocean Challenge. I know people I'm coaching are all getting pretty excited for those races. And Josh and I have been chatting a bit about all the racing and done a bit of training together too. And basically we just wanted to hype it up a bit. And Josh had a few questions he wanted to ask me, and I wanted to see how his training's going. So we decided let's whack it on the potty.
I wanted to nearly interview you. So we'll see. I want to kind of pick your brains. So let's see where this takes us.
Yeah, this is Cooey's catch up. Yeah. Well, first of all, let's start talking about Molokai, and it sounds like the course is going to be as it has been. So starting where it's always started, just off the island of Molokai, and finishing, in on the beach at Hawaii Kai. The wingers sound like they're going to finish out a little bit further, and basically at China Wall. But the subfoils, from what I can gather, are going to be starting and finishing the same as what it always has been. So personally, I'm happy with that, but I know there's a lot of people that are not, because it's the finish is it's not what we normally do when we go for a downwind foil. You don't normally pump up wind for 2Ks. So what do you think of that, Josh? Like, you've never done it, but what's your feeling on the course?
I like the idea how it's an extremely tricky course, because it sounds like the M2M is pretty straightforward. So it's nice to change it up and have one course that, the variables are very different versus a straight downwind for the M2M. So, if we had two races that were straight downwind, it'd be kind of similar. I know conditions change, but I kind of like the idea of having this magic foil that can paddle up in the flats, go mega fast in the swell, and then you can pump against a headwind. So
the unicorn.
I think it's good. I think it's good for the sport, because people are really making crazy prototypes that can nearly do all that now, which is it's really good for foiling. So I kind of back it. And and also, I'm not saying I'm a guru or anything, but I've done plenty of 50K downwinds now, and I know I can do it. So, when you got a course that's a little bit crosswind, then going upwind and starting in the flats, it gives you something to train towards. And I think that's good, because or else maybe I would have taken a bit more of a lazy approach where I would have been like, I could do that.
You kind of want to be scared by the course, I think is the takeaway. You don't want it to be, I've done it before, I can do 50Ks. Yeah. So, it'd be interesting. I think Marcus, I spoke to Marcus about it the other day, and he's like, he was excited that it wasn't going to be, like it was just going to be in the wind line to finish the wind line, because he's like, man, he's done it. And he said the upwind paddle sucks. He said it's brutal. But I think foil choice, and in 2019 it was a pretty windy year, which was really good for the channel and the start. But a really windy year means you got a really strong offshore breeze at the finish. So I'm kind of hoping for not howling winds in some respects, because then you've got an easier finish and a slightly harder start, I guess. But yeah, it'd be interesting. I think there's so many variables, and I guess you talk about the sub 2 minute Ks, and foil's getting better. We're both talking about Kane and long armed apes, sub 2 minute K, like average run over on Maui. Conditions obviously very good, but foil's obviously highly tuned to be that consistent. Pretty impressive. We're just saying there's only been a couple of runs that in the last sort of 6 months that we've. Have you done it under 2, Josh?
I haven't. No, I'm still waiting to crack that 2 minute mark, which I feel like I'm edging there closer and closer. But I think it's just coming down to technique now. I'm not quite choosing the right lines to keep that average super high.
Yeah, and conditions too. Like there are lines to take and sort of force the issue, but when you're doing consistently under 2 and getting the bunch under 150, conditions are pretty good. Like it's you've picked a fast foil because the conditions are good, and when the conditions are that good, you're just rolling with it, I guess. But you got to have the foil, you got to have the conditions, you got to be able to piece it all together. So not discrediting what they've done. It's super impressive.
Not at all. And I think I've seen you boys, like when I say you boys, I mean like James, Zane, and Perth, really pushing that 2-minute mark. And it's been impressive because I feel like, closer we get into this race, it's becoming more consistent that you guys are really pushing that mark. I'm sure you've been doing it for a while now, but it's just like, it's good. It gets like the community kind of, their heads turning because it's becoming consistent, like this sub 2-minute thing, where probably like a year ago, people would have been like, sub 2 minute, like there's no way you could do that. So,
yeah, I remember the first sub 2 I did was on the GoFoil RS 1000, and that was very good conditions and a very good bump. And it was only did it a handful of times. And then testing some Axis stuff, I got under the 2, and then with the code stuff under the 2 as well. Yeah, I just had a few Wi-Fi issues, but I think we sorted it. We're just talking about the conditions over in Maui, basically, and Kane and Long Arm Dave. They're super quick run. I actually just saw a message on one of the LAFC chats, and Kane's on there, and I'm on the downwind group, and he was saying that he did a few slower Ks over 2 minutes because there are lots in the 150s and 140s, so he's moving. I'm actually also stoked that it's become the norm that people are talking about their times in kilometres per hour.
Yeah, I've seen that. I was really interested in seeing that, how the boys are posting it in kilometres an hour, which is like, when I speak to Eric from the Progression podcast, we're always converting miles to kilometres, and it's just like, I don't know, it just does my head in that there's not like I'm happy to switch to miles, but we got to make a
standard.
Standard across the board.
Standardize it.
I'm curious to know what good conditions are, but did anyone mention what the conditions were? Like, obviously they're good, but what's good?
I'm going to message Kane right now. What were the conditions? This is just in the group chat. Yeah.
Like, is it mega windy but no swell, or is swell a decider of how you move fast? Or
yeah, I think it's a combo because obviously wind strength is going to help a lot, but if it's too strong winds, it can make it messy, and then it's hard to read, and falls are going to happen more often. So, and then if the swell's completely flat and the wind's only been blowing for a little bit, then my son's just fallen over and hit his head. Sorry, Kobe. But if the conditions are like I was saying, too flat and the wind hasn't been blowing for long enough, then it's like almost feels like a day run. And then if you have this, to me, the perfect is like here in Sydney, what we've had is like 30 knots, a good direction, and been blowing for like 5 hours. It's like this mid-period, so like 7 to 9 second period swell where you can ride it with the foils that we're on. And it's not too messy because when it's super big and wild, it's
not easy. It's
limitations.
Like, yeah. I reckon, I don't know, I've found that with that I used to think really big swell, like big period, you'd go faster because maybe you're on those big swells for longer. But I've found that like it's exhausting because you're literally like maxing out your foil the whole time, bombing down these swells, but then you're nearly going back up the next swell and then dropping speed super quick. So then your averages aren't keeping high. You're just going really fast, then dropping, really fast, then dropping.
Exactly. So you have to learn how to, that's one of the lessons in my course, but it's like how to keep your speed up and navigate that while keeping your speed high. And I did a video on how to go fast, and people want to know how to go slow as well. And there's different techniques, I guess, for the conditions and depending on what you want to be doing, because it's so many variables, which is cool. And I actually just got a reply from Kane, which is pretty cool. It's like we need to get him on as well. He said it was the second day of blowing 25 to 35 knots, and it was bombing. He said it was all time. At the top section was insane, so they started a bit further up from Molokai, sort of around Piahi, and then below Molokai was not all time. So potentially, basically, what is from reading between the lines, I feel like he was good at the top, but the second half could have been better. So, but 25 to 35 knots. So that's kind of goes in line with what I was saying, like 30 knots strength. That's kind of the happy medium, because when it gets above like 40 and it's smoke on the water, you don't really know what's going on.
I don't even know if I've experienced over 30, 35, but I've found when it's over 30, you're nearly getting pushed off the board. Like your body becomes a sail, I reckon. And when you're holding your paddle, I've found that if you get a gust, you're nearly like getting pushed. Like, and it makes you wobbly and makes you unstable.
Maybe that's why the Hawaii boys are putting it on the back, kind of push them through. Paddles are blowing out of hands. Yeah. We don't have that.
Yeah, I really wanted to kind of pick your brains about, this is my first race on foil or race in general, like any type of race that I've ever done. Yeah. And I've been to Hawaii before, but I've never been to Maui. And M2M is going to be my first race. And I'm just like curious to know how it all goes down. Yeah.
Maui to Molokai is an interesting race. I think it's easier to get lost on Maui to Molokai than it is Molokai to Oahu. Only because you don't, an escort boat isn't mandatory. They've got sort of boats out there as safety, and not too much can go wrong, because it's only, maybe it's like 20 Ks, or 15 Ks across from the northwestern tip of Maui to the southeastern tip of Molokai. So it's not
you're seeing where you're going. You can obviously see where you're going. Right.
You can see the island, but you don't know where on the island you're finishing.
Right.
The first year I did it, it was really rainy, and I didn't know where I was going. And you talk to people with the briefing, and they're like, you can't get lost, it's easy. And it's like, you just want to make sure you get near the Kamalo buoy, which is just a red marker off Molokai. And they're like, from there you can just go straight along the coast, and you won't miss the wharf. It looks like a shed. It's like a house on the water, it looks like from distance. And for the most part, that's true. It's hard to get wrong. I've tested that though, because one year I did the Molokai Holokai, and which is M2M, and there was no Connor, there was no Travis. I think it was me and Cody Kerbox were pretty much racing on the stand-ups, and I was just having a really good time, and I had a bit of a gap at Cody at the start, and I went really far left towards Lanai, which is a really fun direction to be going, but it's not the straightest line, and it's not the best line to make most of the currents. And I think I paddled an extra 5 or 6 kilometers, and I didn't see Cody for the whole race until the last 2 Ks. And as I was coming in from way out wide, I saw him sort of coming up, and he thought I'd finished ages ago, but I took a really bad line. So we talked about setting a run line with your watch, and Garmin. I've used Garmin for the last 8 years. My dad used to use Garmin when he did triathlons, and when he did Molokai, he'd use Garmin, so I just use the same stuff. You can set a run line, so you can basically have you've got to do it on a desktop. You can't do it on your phone. You've got to get onto your laptop or whatever you got at home and use the online Garmin Connect, and you can set a run line, and you can adjust it to sort of suit the run line you want to take. But really, you just want to go point A to point B, and then you can see on your watch, there'll be a line, and you'll be able to tell if you're, left or right of it. And so on your watch, you can look down, there'll be an arrow pointing this way and an arrow pointing that way. So it tells you which direction to go. And if you're really close to the run line, it'll just be flipping both ways. Whereas if you're way off, it'll always be pointed one way. So
and does that cancel out what you normally see on your watch, like your last lap time and your average speed?
No, it'll have an app. You can have that last lap time and average speed and whatever else you want, heart rate, but it'll just have an arrow one way or the other.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. So it's pretty good, and that's at least how my Garmin Phoenix 5 has been set up, and it's pretty sick. You don't have to think about it. But
that's definitely one of the anxieties I've been feeling with this race, and even when I do downwinds over your side of the bridge, I always get confused where to come in. And I feel like that's
similar headlands.
That's enough to kind of throw you off and kind of maybe, zig a little bit in, and then it's not the right place. So then you zag back out, and then you're just wasting time and kilometers. So
we had good training, but you wouldn't want to be doing that for a race.
Yeah.
Travis Grant on an outrigger canoe did M2M one year. I don't think it was even his first year doing it, but I think he was winning, or it was a really good year, and he was on an outrigger, so sitting down and couldn't see as much. On the foil, he had the advantage that we're up really high. So actually line of vision is much better, even than a stand-up. And obviously outrigger is worse, and then prone is even harder. But he missed the finish line altogether. The bumps were so good, he was just in the zone, in race mode, just paddling and not looking around. And he looked at his watch, he's like, I should be close to finish now. And he went like all the way to the boat harbour, about another, I think it's like another 20 Ks.
Oh, shit.
And he basically was lost. It's funny because he was fine, but if it wasn't funny, it could have been pretty bad. If it wasn't fine. But there are stories of people going overshooting it, undershooting it, and then ending up on Lanai. You definitely want to. Actually, the first year Zane Schweitzer did M2M, he ended up on Lanai on the foil. First time he foiled M2M, he ended up on Lanai. I think the angle wasn't quite right, and the foils were not quite at the level they are now. But I think he pretty much was at the surf break at Lanai, and then had to get picked up by an escort and drop him back on the line, and then he finished from there.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's things that can go wrong for sure.
Yeah. How does the logistics work? And I know you said that you don't necessarily need a support boat for M2M, but all the different disciplines leaving at separate times. And then, so is there always kind of crew in front of you that you can kind of eye down, or
yes, I haven't done it on the foil. So, but on the stand up, it was when I've done it on the stand up, the sups go first, and then the foils would go an hour later or something.
Right.
And maybe it was half an hour. It was later. Generally, for M2O, there's prone, then sup, then foil, and then wing foil, I think, as well, this year. But I guess you're asking about for M2M. M2M is generally a smaller race, and it's a smaller channel too, but I still had moments out there where I'm feel like I'm the only person out there.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be relying on following someone else, that's for sure. The watch is a really good one. Your phone on you is almost the best thing, and I'm not sure there's reception in the middle, but there would be reception close to the island, and at some point you'd be able to paddle to reception. But you need. There's got an email today from Claire saying safety stuff. So you need life jackets, you need a whistle, you need a mirror, you need. I'm not sure they said flare, but there's a bunch of things that are you need, and obviously we can't take the piss. Obviously you can get away with. There's no escort, and you can get away with that, but you've got to have the safety equipment, and you sort of have to do that because the organisers have trusted us.
Yeah,
so we don't want to blow that. Yeah. You don't want to blow it, exactly. You don't want to ruin it for everyone else.
Yeah.
But M2M's a tricky one in terms of less people, smaller channel, but where do you finish on the island, I guess, and no escort. So you're relying on sort of other people, but you don't necessarily see other people. So
the best way for training for this race would just be doing heaps of this Molokai run in Maui, because that's kind of the first half, or?
It's so M2M is it's a good race, but the first half is definitely more cutting right, because you want to get across to Molokai and then sort of run down the island. If you go straight, you sort of end up on the Lanai, and then you got to cut across towards the end. So a Molokai run's very straight and almost running left towards the end. You could almost just, for training, you want to, and same for M2O, you want to practice cutting right. So if the wind's blowing straight down the barrel, you want to be going with it and then cut across, and then go with it and then cut across. So on a foil, you've got the advantage that you can cut some really big angles, and especially with these higher spec foils, cutting across is getting easier and easier. So it's definitely not straight down the barrel. Don't be thinking it's that. But Yeah, it's as straight down the barrel as a channel crossing comes from my experience, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like that race is more straighter than the M20, which is hard right, isn't it?
Yeah, like I think I'm a bit biased because I love surfing right, and the southerlies we have here in Sydney are generally you're going to have to surf right because you're fighting the swells that are wrapping into shore. As an Aussie, I think it's kind of standard. It's not too hard to cut right, but for a Hawaiian, it's a hard right. just because I say that because Hawaiians generally have better conditions, so they've got wind at their back and they're going with the wind. Whereas in Australia, we have coastlines that headlands and funny wind directions and
Californians as well. They're always cutting right.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So there's different, levels of cutting right. And I know in WA they always cut left. So whenever they have to cut right, they find it really hard and they're like, oh, it's so hard to cut right. It's like, yeah, been cutting left all summer and you have to cut right for one race in the doctor. To me, it's a straight run, but I'm very natural footed in that I like to go right. So it's not so big an issue for me. Whereas cutting left has always been trickier, which is our nor'easters here, which we tend to, I find we tend to get less of them. And I guess the coast is probably less, it's better for the nor'easters, it seems, than the southerlies in that it's straighter.
So it sounds like what we've been getting in our winter months here now is kind of similar to what we're going to probably experience over there. Cutting right, big swells, kind of pretty windy.
Yeah.
Not that we've been getting a heap of runs, but like
when it's on, it's similar. The difference, I guess, is the air temperature and the swell size. A lot of the time in this time of year, we get bigger swells, and like longer period swells, which in Hawaii in summer, it's more that mid-period stuff, trade swells, which is just the wind's blowing for a long time. So you're not going to get like 20-second periods or like 15-second periods. They're more that sort of 8 to 12 seconds. And that's really good for downwind because it's shorter. So then there's more bumps to sort of take advantage of it. It's interesting this year because Hood River's in between M2M and M2O, and Hood River's a very different race to M2M, which is also a very different race to M2O. So for me in like sort of training, day runs are really good training for Hood River, but they're not such good training for M2O. And Hood River is like the pinnacle of day runs. You got the tide against you, you got the wind blowing down down the gully, down the river, and it's very organised compared to an ocean run. So that'll be really, really interesting. And I saw on a thread that Kane was saying he's got he's planning on using one foil for M2M, Hood River, and M2O, and I thought that was pretty game because I couldn't imagine using the same foil for M2M as M2O just because of the start and finish of M2M versus M2O. And then for Hood River as well, because you're compromising somewhere within there. It either suggests that he's got a foil with a really big range on it, so super high aspect, or he's just using what he has available, So,
are you going to Hood?
Yeah, I am. Looks like I'm going to be over there for Saturday, but I want to get back over to Hawaii to sort of continue my prep for M2O because that's kind of my main focus. But yeah, I'm going to go to Hood River for the downwind fall race and a little bit of code foil business trip with Marcus and Ben. Yeah, should check out the shops and whatnot.
Yeah, lovely.
So it'd be cool to check out Big Winds and the Hood River froth. It's pretty sick over there. I'm actually excited to get there. I'm sad it's the week before M2O because it was the week after I would have probably spent a bit more time there, but because it's sandwiched in between M2M and M2O, it'll be a strike mission.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of smelling it so crammed in because I'm going to wait for the second event, that ASWI or whatever. Yeah. But then I heard it's a riskier time to go because there might not be as much wind. So
it is what it is. You can get skunked in July as well in Hood. I've been there. Yeah. I think I've been there 4 times, and definitely there's been days without wind in July. And if you're there for 3 or 4 days, it's like, oh, hope I don't get like a heat trough, no wind. But yeah, it's still a cool place to hang out anyway. It's hikes and stuff to do, and heaps of cool people to visit. But it'll be exciting. It looks like the wing course race will be pretty fun too, which I would have been cool to stick around for, but I want to try to get back to Hawaii and have the most rest between and in your same climate and less travel sort of stuff going on.
Yeah, totally. You don't want to be all jet lagged and feeling a bit off and stuff.
Yeah. And probably won't matter, but also the families over in Hawaii, and they're not coming to Hood, so it'll be a quick in and out. Yeah. But then obviously Molokai to Oahu, and that's the pinnacle to me. And I was chatting to Marcus about it yesterday, and we're talking about how it's the pinnacle to us. But for a lot of people, Molokai to Oahu is like this distant sort of too hard basket, cool to watch and cool to read about the results, but not really something that they'll ever actually do. I feel like the foil and the equipment's making it easier, but it's still a gnarly race. Like, it's the Channel of Bones. It's the channel that like Eddie Aikau got lost in. Like, I
heard about this race obviously when I was a grommet and seeing like Jamie Mitchell, and just had all these crazy Ironmen kind of in my head. They're the type of people who do it. And I've known a couple like people personally, and never actually thought that I would ever do it. And I think if it was, prone or like prone paddling, I don't know if I'd have it in. Like, obviously, if you trained enough, I would have it in me. But like, definitely the foil has opened up a category that has made it achievable now. I think maybe just because I've put all my eggs in this basket and I just love it, and it's all I can think about, and it's just...
It's definitely the most rewarding of the three, prone, SUP, and foil. Like, yeah, it's more surfing, less paddling. That's for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
But also, like, on that, like the prone, the fastest time on the prone is like, I think it's like 4.5 hours. The fastest time on the SUP is just under 4 hours, and then the fastest time on the foil is like just over 2 hours. So it's like it's a very different race. Like, I remember the first year I did it, I was chatting to some of the prone girls after the race, and they were like, "Oh, you're like, how'd you go?" I'm like, "Oh, you're doing all right." And he was like 4.5, 5 hours. Like, "How about you guys?" "Oh, we're out there for 8 hours." I'm like, 8 hours? Like, that's a different race altogether. The stock guys are crazy. I've always done unlimited, but the stock, so like 12-foot or 14-foot boards, it's a long way. But as you said, on the foil, it makes it easier, as long as, it makes you think it's easier. I think it's probably not necessarily going to be easy. It's just more to navigate. But if everything goes well, it's going to be a much shorter race. It could very well be a longer race.
That's what I want to. I've been sent a few links recently of these like OC1 races that have gone in the last couple of weeks, and I guess there is a potential for it to be fully glassy, right? Yeah,
first year I did it, 2016. I think there was like a 6-foot south swell, and it was no wind. It was like glassy. The only bumps we caught was off China Wall. There was rebound running across to a canwy to paddle around, and then there were 6-foot waves coming in at the finish. It was crazy. There's a good photo of Travis Grant.
For foil, what's going to happen with that? Like, do they still run it and just like people just pump and then connect swells, or are they going to maybe postpone it to the next day? Like, how's it work?
I don't think they've ever postponed it, any of the races for Molokai, not that I know of. Personally, I'd be happy to go. I've done the training that, like, there's always energy, and even that year that it was no wind, there were swells that you could have 100% foiled. But it wouldn't have been as fun as it was in 2019 when the winds were howling. The difference was 2019, the headwind at the finish was stupid and there were no waves, whereas 2016, or maybe it was 2015, the year that was flat with swell, like you could almost, like I think Travis Grant caught away from the outside and surfed it all the way to the end. And so if it's bad in the middle, at least it's good at the end. And if it's good in the middle, it's going to be bad at the end. So it's kind of one of those ones that it's going to be bad at some point, regardless.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely better if the middle's got a bit more assistance, because that middle's, 45 Ks. Yeah.
So it sounds like we're still going. We got to bring probably big foils, I guess, or like big high aspect foils in case it is glassy. Yeah. I did 20 beaches when it was like, I was trying to get out the local crew to come join me, but there was like no wind.
there was maybe a 5-knot southeast breeze that picked up like halfway through the race, but there was swell. And because yes, the best thing is that there's trade swell that time of year. Like the easterlies are going to be blowing majority of the time. Even if there's no wind on the day, there will be energy running that way. And I know you've experienced that, Josh. Like when there's at home here, when there's a northeast wind blowing for 2 or 3 days, the wind can go northwest and you're still getting bumps, even though the wind's like almost in your face or crossways. So it's not enjoyable, but you got to train for it all, and that's
I've definitely I've been eyeing off the shittier days because I feel like they're the days that you learn stuff because there's not as much energy out there, so you got to tap into whatever you can get versus the days where it's good. You just you can make a mistake. There's something 6 feet behind you that's going to push you again. So I kind of like, as brutal as it is. Like I did one the other day, 7 knots. Swell, majority of the swell wasn't going the direction that I was going, but there was enough fetch from that 7 knots or 10 knots or whatever that allows you to get from point A to point B. And I just it was a brutal downwind, but it was good. You learn.
Yeah, that's one of the things that people traveling to do Hawaii and the races in July have generally done pretty well. The Aussies have done very well in Molokai to Oahu in the past, like Jamie Mitchell, for example, Travis Grant, because they've always trained in all conditions, whereas the Hawaiians, generally speaking, they don't think it's windy until it's 25, 30 knots. So they're only training when it's windy because that's when it's the most fun. They're ignoring the 10 knot days, 5 to 10 knot days, because if every day is 30 knots, then of course you're going to ignore the 10 knot day. Your level of windiness changes. So it's, we have the advantage that our conditions suck. So if conditions suck for race day, we're used to it.
That's good call.
So it's always been interesting looking at that. The first year I did Molokai in the SUP, about half the field pulled out because there was no wind, and everyone had trained thinking it was a downwind race. But I've always said Molokai to Oahu is an ocean race. It's not necessarily downwind, and even if it is downwind, it's very tricky. So you need to be able to read the ocean and not just go straight with the wind, because you'll end up too far south if you just follow the wind. Yeah.
I noticed the other day when we were training flat water paddling, you're playing around with some longer sized boards compared to what you've been riding. What are your thoughts on that? Like, are you kind of thinking, something that you can flat water start a tiny foil on? Is that what you're thinking? Or
well, look, I guess we're not surfing downwind when we're racing. It's as much as that pains me to say, like you're going for speed. So if you're on a longer board that allows you to get up earlier on a smaller foil, it's going to allow you to basically be quicker, not just because you're quicker getting up, and not because you're quicker getting up, but also there's just less time not going. So I think there's been rumours of people paddling like an 8-foot board in Maui is now considered short, I heard, and there's like 9 and 10-foot boards that are getting around. I've in the last 6 months, I've only really just gone to a 610, and I can paddle up most conditions on that. And I've just gotten a few new boards closer to 8 feet, and I haven't tried them downwind yet because they had a little bit of wind, but I was having a rest day, and so I haven't really had a good test of what I think. But definitely, it's easier paddling up a board that's 8 foot than a board that's 610. That's kind of obvious. But it really just, I don't know. I'm going to bring a few boards over, I think, to Hawaii, and see what the story is for me over there, and maybe conditions pending. But for a race, it makes a lot of sense to go a longer board, just because you can get up sooner and use a smaller foil. Even if you're getting up at the same time, it's going to be quicker in terms of the point A to point B. But also, I love turning and surfing, but maybe that's for the training runs, not so much the race day.
I was kind of stoked I got to try a few of those longer boards, because it settled my thoughts on chasing, what I've heard in Hawaii, those guys going to 9-foot boards and, stupid skinny. Because I found from what I was paddling the other day, like it didn't benefit me.
No.
Like
It was hard
got
because
to
it was
the
a
point-
different bottom shape. So it was a different board altogether. It probably would have been, to have a Sultan that was 8 foot probably would have been better than comparing an Aviator that was 8 feet, because the Sultans with that, the pintail with no rocker, it's a different kind of style of paddle up. It's like more almost back foot to like sort of bounce it up like this, whereas the Aviators are more, you almost got to keep them flatter, because if you sink the tail, then you're going to, it's like it almost stops you. I don't know. It's just a different, all the boards have different traits, I guess. And I feel like the Aviators are good at planing to releasing, whereas the Sultans have a different sort of paddle up style, and it's more about working that sort of pumping motion and speed, and you can almost paddle it up because of all the speed you can generate from on the water, whereas the Aviators are more, we don't go as fast through the water, but when you start to pump and release them, they seem to release earlier. So it's a different...
But it was, what I was trying to say is like, I liked how it shut down the theory of like, not shut down because like obviously like what you're saying, like different boards and stuff, but I feel like you can get carried away with always wanting something that you don't have. You're like, or if my board was 6 inches longer and half an inch narrower, I could easily get up. But like I feel like it, at the end of the day, it nearly comes down to like your technique and training and getting used to what you got.
That's the most important thing, getting used to what you have. Because if you were to use an 8-foot Aviator on the day of the race, because you're like, oh, if I got the chance to use an 8-foot one and I've been using a 7-foot, the 8-foot would be heaps easier. But if it's a different bottom shape, different outline, all that sort of stuff.
Different technique of paddling up as well.
It's like okay, well, the best board you have is the one you're used to.
Yeah. And I've definitely learnt that from my multiple, like failed downwinds, but where I'm like tuning my gear differently on like a longer run. And then I'll feel on my first paddle up, or as soon as I get going, I'm like, fuck, this doesn't feel good. And you just got to commit, because you can't change your gear when you're out there. But yeah, I've gotten comfy on my gear, but like obviously always tuning and changing a few little things here and there. But yeah, you gotta just get out on the flat water, or like even just like a surf session on your SUP, just to feel how it feels with taking off and the lift through turns and through energy.
Yeah, I just did a session like that yesterday, and I've been sort of hanging because I got a few new boards and a few new foils, and I want to try to test them out, and been hanging to just get some downwind conditions in, and just sort of waiting, nothing in the forecast. So I went out yesterday, had a little beach break, pretty much empty, just foilers. And they were chipping in, but I was sort of sitting wider, and I was doing, just pumping around in circles basically. And actually Anthony was out there. He's like, "Are you training for Molokai?" And I'm like, "Yeah, dude. Why else would I be pumping around for 6 minutes at once? There's no waves. there's no wind." He's like, "Oh, sick." He was frothing. But I was like, that's what you have to do when there's no wind. And, there's, I guess, 3 things that to me you've got to practice when you're learning, or when you're training for a race, and that's time on foil. So that's just the pump so that's time on foil, which is the pump, how to pump your board and time your paddle stroke and that sort of stuff. And then reading the ocean. So obviously waves versus downwind is pretty different, but it's all maneuvering your board into the right spot. So they're the two important things once you're up. But then also the third thing is paddling up. And so I was making a point of not paddling up onto waves. I was trying to paddle up, like if the waves are breaking this way, I was paddling up across, because I didn't want to be using the wave energy to get up every time. So, and I was pumping headwind. It was bugger all wind, but a few of us commented, "Man, that easterly is like hard to pump into." So I was, pumping into the wind, and it was just building all those, how to pump my board, how to use the paddle to help, how to settle the heart rate, how to breathe, all those things. And actually, with the downwind equipment in the surf, you can kind of create your own downwinder. I think I did about 10 Ks yesterday, just in the surf, sort of going around in circles, and tested a bunch of gear. So it was very useful, and it wasn't a good forecast for downwinding. So, that's for those that don't have wind and they're doing or signed up for any of these downwind races, don't feel like you've got to wait for wind. You can create that downwind experience, I guess, in the surf, and it's actually harder pumping in and out through waves. Of, talking to Oscar about his surf world record that was broken by Dylan, and like it's harder.
Yeah, I did a good one the other last week where we had terrible downwind wind. It was like straight on shore, but like it was like 15 knots, so enough to go downwinding. So I would paddle. I did like 3 in and outs paddling from the shore out to the point of my local beach, which is probably just under a kilometre paddle on your chest.
Yeah.
And then I would get out there and was practicing my paddle up, and then would pump back to shore and would just do that. And I felt like that was really good Molokai training because, if you come down at the end, you got to paddle your board on your chest. Yeah. So I was just like, and I was gassed after my 3rd run of that. I was like, yeah, so it was good. And I got like little downwind runs. So it's enough to keep me happy. So
yeah. And you're working the paddle up, you're working the reading the bumps, and then you're working, I don't want to be paddling it on my chest if I can avoid it. I'd prefer to just practice staying up into the wind, but shit happens. You reach a tip, or you run over a bit of plastic, or there's a boat, or whatever it is. There's things that can happen. You got to plan for everything. So I guess on Molokai to Oahu, there's that, like we talked about the unicorn foil. You don't want to be on such a big foil that you can pump up wind and then be hanging on in the middle, losing all this speed. And see Kai and Jeffrey back in 2019. Jeffrey smoked Kai through the channel, but Kai smoked Jeffrey upwind, and that was the race.
That's it. I want to know also, like obviously you just shared like your training tips and stuff, but have you been going into diet a little bit, or are you just kind of keeping it how you are normally, or like leading up to the race, do you change a few things and like, maximize your proteins or something, or your carbs, or I'm curious.
I'm like pescatarian, so mainly just eat veggies, and then I eat fish sort of when I'm out. And we don't normally cook fish, but if we're away and having restaurants, and we sort of add fish to the menu, just so it's a bit easier to eat. But yeah, I don't change too much. I try to eat healthier. Like I'll have less,
less sugar,
bakery goods, and stuff like that. But like, try to be on your best behavior. But I'm not a big believer in diet, so to speak, because I feel like they're short term. So I just try to be consistent with what I'm eating and have variety in the vegetables and carbs. I'm probably big on carbs. Like if I'm training more, I'm having more carbs because I'm hungrier. So another scoop of rice or another bit of, I have like oats in the morning, and it's heaps of nuts. And
so it sounds like it's pretty, organic and natural versus like you're not going down the road of like all these supplements and stuff like that. Or Dane is very el natural, and he does like everything that isn't supplements and stuff. He loves all the natural stuff. But
I guess, look, in terms of nutrition, like if you can see like what it is, it's best because basically the more like the supplementy things, I guess they've got to be processed to get into that sort of level. So if you could take those supplements, the same stuff naturally, like from pull it out of the ground and, cook it up or whatever you want to do with it, it's probably better. But sometimes those things just aren't available. So I'm not against supplements by any means, but definitely you got to pick and choose which are the right ones.
I find I've done a lot of travel recently, and it's really hard to keep yourself pretty healthy when, traveling to different countries. You don't know, where the good spot to buy food from, and you're eating a lot of shit. And like, that's one thing that I'm a little bit nervous about, and try and like kind of have the diet that I have here at home, because I know when I get to especially America, it's so hard to keep healthy.
Yeah, so, something as simple as bread in the US is hard to find good stuff. It's like full of sugar. It's like dairy bread over there. It's crazy. But you definitely tune into, like, I'll show you around Maui, mate. I got a few spots. But definitely it's tricky, and I totally hear. And that's why I kind of like your less processed stuff, because every country, no matter where you go, has sweet potato, tomatoes, capsicum, friggin' pumpkin, broccoli, cauliflower, and you can make a lot of good things with all that. And you got your seeds and nuts and beans, and you can do a lot with that sort of stuff, is what I've found. Even something as simple, like a lot of people go to Bali and they get barley belly, and my wife and I have had it before as well, but last time we went, we'd gone vegetarian, and we just ate veggies, and we didn't get barley belly. And I've heard similar stories. I guess it's harder to get sick from veggies than meat. Not saying that meat's bad. I think meat's important to have in your diet, but personally, I've just felt better without having it, and less sickness and food poisoning, I guess, examples.
That's good to hear. While we're talking about that, I think another one that adds into it is how do you go with rest? Are you I think I talked to you how you said if you do this downwind race from hang on, I've lost my chain of thought. When are you going to do a downwind race from one island to the other because you get a free lift back, and then do that the day before or something like that? You were telling me.
Yeah,
I lost the logistics. I forgot.
One of the days I did a run from Sydney to a race up around Newcastle. I think it was Catherine Hill Bay. So it was the Moon Island Classic, and I was training for a foil sort of thing, and I foiled up to Nora Head, and the wind was pretty shit. So friends of mine picked me up from there because I was going to go all the way to the start, but the wind wasn't good enough. So, and then we drove 20 minutes to the race. I did the race on the stand up, and then we drove home. Definitely not the best preparation for the SUP race, but the SUP race wasn't really my priority at that time. It was training for the foil, long distance foil stuff. I was training for the downwinder, the 200K downwinder I did. And that was like a free lift, basically. I didn't have to worry about logistics, essentially. But I definitely would not. I wouldn't say it's the best thing to do. I know when I go there, I'm not going with my missus, so my plan's to downwind every day. And obviously that might be a bit taxing on the old body but then I think a lot of the runs on both islands, they're not more than 20 Ks, are they? Depends, I guess, what run you're doing, but the standard runs are closer to 15 for sure.
Okay, so I guess you could. That's manageable. You're not. I feel like if you're doing, 40 to 50K runs every second day, you're going to get burnt out big time. Yeah.
And look, and it depends what you're training for too. We're doing a 52 kilometer race, so if you're paddling 52, if you're foiling 52 Ks every day, you're going to be cooked. That's the most distance you need to do. I guess in terms of training stuff, I've always said you're better off doing 2 15-kilometer paddles or foils than you are 1 30K foil, because you can do more quality and have rest and refuel and recover better in between. So doing 1 30K foil, you're going to go into more fatigue. So, if the race, if you're only there for a week and the race is the last day of the week and you get there and you do
isn't that
runs,
training the aerobic part? Because in a 15, you might not even get into aerobic.
Yeah, look, you just don't want to be doing it all the time. So, to do a 52K foil, you actually don't ever have to do 52Ks in training. You could do 30K runs, 40K runs, but you don't have to do the actual distance. Technically, a lot of it's the longer runs are kind of more for testing your nutrition, so knowing what to eat, what to drink on the run, how you're going to do it, how you're going to go about paddling with the stuff on you, how you're going to get up and foil with the stuff on you. And it's just that confidence, okay, I know I've done this before, I've paddled with this much equipment on me, I know I can get up in anything and it's going to be fine, versus going into an unknown thinking, I haven't tested this nutrition and maybe I'm going to get a stomach cramp, maybe I don't have enough food, maybe I've got too much food, and not knowing. So it's more about nutrition, I feel like, the longer foils, a lot longer runs we do, than it is actual distance, because I know plenty of people that have been out in really bad conditions for 3 hours over a 20K run. And if conditions are good, they're going to be out there for 3 hours for a 50K run. You know what I mean? So the time isn't so much the issue, and the kilometers aren't so much the issue.
The quality
it's
of the
Yeah, and when we're training, it's about you make gains by, doing exercise. But if you do too much exercise, you actually lose because you to fatigue. So you're balancing this fitness versus fatigue, and then you have your form. So it's really important to not overdo it, and then not to underdo it, and just sort of tread that middle line. So you're steadily increasing it. And basically, the trick is baby steps. Write it down. If I did a 10K foil this week, next week I'm going to do an 11K foil. And the week after I do a 12K foil. And the week after I'm not all of a sudden going to do a 24K foil because conditions are good realistically to make it the steady growth. I should do it a 13K, then 14K, then 15K, then 16K. And that steady growth is going to get you in the long run much better growth because you're not going to get fatigued. So if I go 10, 11, 12, 24, I'm going to be really tired after that 24K foil. And I'm going to be tired into the next week. And if I then do a 14K next week, I won't be as strong because I'm fatigued as I would have been if I'd done a 13K the week before. So it's just about being disciplined. And look, I'm not perfect. If the conditions are good, I'm looking to do a longer one. We all are. But like in terms of like your perfect training plan, it's not that hard. It's just increase stuff a little bit at a time. And the hard thing is with the ocean and wind and whatnot, and downwind foiling, it's not something that's a controlled environment. It changes a lot, and that's the hardest bit. But if you can make it as, I guess, a linear increase as you can, then it's going to make it easier for you. Even something simple as if you're doing like gym workouts and you do 10 push-ups the first week and you do 3 rounds of that. Next week you do 12 push-ups and you do 3 rounds of that. Week after you do 14. And it's just like something as simple as just gradually stepping it up and say you're doing 2 sets every week, continue to do 2 sets every week and just make it a little bit harder each time. People make it more confusing than it needs to be. Oh, you got to do this and you got to do that. You need to do this. And it's like, sometimes it's as simple as just listen to your body. And if you feel crook, but your session says you've got to do, a 20K downwinder, but you're not feeling like 100%, you're fighting off a bit of a cold, probably better off resting.
Yeah.
And doing that 20K, maybe just missing that 20K downwinder and leaving it for next week because it's the fatigue versus fitness. Yeah. And that's the hard part. To balance it out.
It's good to hear. Like you've obviously, one of the best downwinders in the world and done the longest kilometers. So it's cool to hear these training regimes and stuff. And
yeah, and I guess for the 200, like I didn't paddle 200 Ks before. Like it wasn't going to help me. Like 6 months out, if I'd done, I think I did 120, and that was the first I'd ever done beforehand. That was just sort of to more sort out logistics in terms of the run, in terms of what I was carrying on me, and knowing how far I could go without doing a swap of packs. But I was so loaded up. I had like 6 liters of water and food and and that sort of stuff. So like you figure out what those sorts of logistics, and you figure out the body can do it. But if you can do 2 hours or 2.5 hours out in the water, you can do 12 because it's all about refueling your body and continuing to refuel it whilst you're out there.
Oh, then the last question before you got to go. So are you bringing fuel on these races, or do you just like machine it? Because
it's a really tricky distance. Like a 2-hour race is like I'm thinking we're going to be doing 2 hours. If you're looking at what Kane's times are, like 140s, 150s. At some point in the race, that certainly drags your average down close to 30 Ks an hour rather than 20, and it's a 52K race. So if you're averaging anything over 26 Ks an hour, it's 2 hours. Obviously, the finish is going to slow you up, and the beginning is going to slow you up a touch. But the bulk of the race is in the wind. So I think 2 hours is probably about where we're looking, give or take. 15, 20 minutes either side, I reckon. And I think you do need fuel, like definitely water, because it's hot over there, and you're going to be sweating a lot. So like electrolytes, carbohydrate sort of mix in your drink, which isn't natural. Like I was talking about having it's easier to drink than it is to eat. So if you can drink your food, it's easier, but obviously it's not as good for the the body. You know, that's what
What's a
Zane.
carbohydrate? Is it natural honey? Is that a carbohydrate?
I've never used. I've always just used the powders, which isn't.
Okay.
It's the use of supplements. You know, which it's just been no real way around it because the honey kind of settles at the bottom, so you get nothing until the end, or it gets stuck in the bottom. So it's a bit trickier than you'd think. You know, gels. People talk about gels. I prefer to take like fruit, like an apple or a banana is going to be better to me than a gel because gels are a bit processed.
Yeah, totally.
I've had bad guts from gels before.
And like the reason I'm asking this is because I've personally found, a vest that's loaded up, it's a lot harder to paddle up because you're heavier.
Yeah,
and like it's just bulkier. Like it throws your weight off a bit. Like
you got to train with it. I think is the answer.
Yeah.
So when you're doing flat water paddle ups, you should be with your 2 liters of water, a banana at the front, an apple at the side. You know, you're ready to go. Gels stuck down the back.
Yeah, because
tape to your paddle, whatever it is.
I was talking to Perth the other day. I showed him my vest, and I was like, "Fuck, this is pretty heavy." And he was like, "Mate, I'm not fucking wearing a vest. I'm gonna just foil." And then he reckons the boat's gonna throw him food or water or something. Or
there's definitely ways around it, but you got the risk of one coordinating that. And risking falling off because you're trying to catch an apple or something. You fall off once, you're better off paddling up with the water that's heavy at the start, you know. So it's a tough one for sure. Like it's all stuff you just got to practice. So if you're going to do
is there? I've heard like whispers. What's the rules? You can't touch the boat or something, can't you?
No, you can't touch the boat. So normally in the past, like I've had a nutrition person on my boat, and they'll actually jump off the boat. And they'll hand me water and then they'll swim back up onto the boat. With the foil, I'm not sure how it's going to work because on the SUP, you're going like 8 Ks an hour or like on 10 Ks an hour. Whereas in the foil, you're like going 20 to 30 Ks an hour. So for a boat to stop and have someone jump in and hand you stuff, it's much harder. So like what we practiced with Zane on the 200K downwinder was he had like a
gap.
On the stick, and you could freaking just grab it. But like then you got to take off what you're wearing and put it on. So I think whatever you got to do, you just got to practice it. So if you're going to start with it, you got to practice paddling up in that. And if you're not going to start with it and do a change,
I'm going to go vest.
Yeah, I think because you don't have to wear a life jacket because you've got an escort boat with you. I think a life jacket's probably not the best thing because it's extra weight that you don't necessarily need. But like Camelback have like little bags.
Yeah,
and you have that one with
that's what I bought. Yeah, I
things
bought
on the front.
Like I think they call it a hydration running vest.
Yeah, like perfect. And you can stash food in the front too.
Yeah. It's got heaps of pockets and but I was surprised the weight on it. Like but what's good is that it evens the weight out because there's little drink bottles at the front, like on your chest. I'm not putting as much in my back now. Yeah. So, and it's all much tighter than a life jacket setup. Everything's a lot tighter and sticks to you. So that's what I went. So I'm still going to bring my life jacket because I seen that email from.
Yeah, I think for M2M I'll wear the life jacket.
M2M you have to wear a life jacket. Yeah. So I'll still bring it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting what everyone uses and what the sort of norm is, and if people go for the change, like you saw Jacko's M2M video last year where they're throwing apples at him, and he dropped one. We got the second one, and there's no doubt that him having to shift his focus from downwinding to then catching an apple, and then going back to downwinding, it's going to be way harder. So maybe he would have been better off having an apple in his pocket because an apple isn't going to ruin your weight distribution, especially not for M2M. I think but it's you just got to train with it, get used to it, be ready to go when the race happens. Because if you don't, then and this is the stuff like all the stuff in the. Like the Coach Casey sort of online stuff, and it's a bit more detailed on there, but talking about nutrition, talking about training, talking about ways to train if conditions aren't right, and, cardio stuff versus like aerobic versus anaerobic. And there's a whole, not so much science. It's a little bit science, but it's kind of common sense when you step it out and having someone, like for me, even having to write the program each week and sending it out to crew, for me, it's like good discipline. I know that if I'm setting this, I've got to do this as well. And it's
I
better.
always say when you teach someone, you learn yourself.
So much.
You're just drilling it into yourself.
Yeah. I was writing out a course for another sort of section of the Coach Casey Club and just writing it. It's like, I know all this, but when you write it down, it makes it really clear in your head.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's sort of decodes what you're thinking. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Cool.
I think we're going to go out for a little afternoon walk before it gets too cold.
Lovely. No, it's good chatting.
Yeah, well, I want to do more of these. So I'm going to get. I know there's some crew heading up to Cairns later in July when we're in Hawaii. So might get JB or Tim Fitzsimmons, the crew up there who are heading there to jump on the podcast and talk about what they're doing for it.
I'd love to do that race. If I don't do Hawaii next year, I'd love to go up there. It sounds like a beautiful race.
Yeah, poor man's Hawaii.
Yeah.
It is pretty cool. Not a channel crossing, but it's a long race.
Cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool last year. They need to push the start back a little bit for the foils, or maybe just hope for a windier day because it was pretty small bumps at the start. But that's part of the challenge, right? But yeah, let's start hyping up Downwind Month. When I first started sort of stand-up paddling racing, they had this thing, like they advertised it Downwind Month, and SIC, a stand-up paddle brand, sort of sponsored it. And there was like all this media and stuff talking about the races, and it sort of, like after the second year of me racing, it sort of became less and less, and it was more about Euro Tour, which is more flat water racing. And I'm like, I wanted the downwind stuff, and that's when I started. That's what it was about. But it's like reinvigorating now at the foil, and I'm pumped. But there's no like media outlet for foil.
Yeah, that's why I think this is important. You know, we become our own media outlets and
share
let's just push it because there's enough people who are so foil brained about it that finding all these little, you know, media outlets like you, and it's just people are dying for this information.
Yeah.
Even if it's just like, you know, Chinese whispers or something. I want to know what's going on.
Fully. Yeah. It's exciting times. Looking forward to this, and then I'm also excited for the WA later this year. I
forgot about that.
Got to fit that into your calendar somehow, mate. November, be there. Should be fun.
For sure.
But yeah, hopefully the weed clears. Not going if there's a weed. Freaking shit.
Every time I've gone, it's always been good. So if I go,
you got to come. Yeah, you got to come. Yeah.
All right, mate.
Yeah, cheers. I'll catch you later.
Catch you later.
Thanks everyone for listening along. Stay tuned for more.